Okay, maybe we should begin by introducing ourselves. That's a great
Really
idea.
good idea.
I think we should begin by doing that immediately.
We're all going to be Zoom experts by the time this is done.
Wendelin, you want to start? Tell us all about yourself.
Oh, okay. I might as well start talking. My name's Scot Noel. I'm the publisher and editor of Dreamforge magazine, which we started in late 2017, and we're now on our 7th issue. And we've published some stories about older protagonists, which we can talk about later. So, nice to be here.
Mandolin?
I actually write in a niche, and I'm self-published, so I have a lot of fantasy horror blends that are East Asian focused or Silk Road focused kind of cultural issues and cultural references. I tend to write a lot of older characters, and in fact, one of my series I've got protagonists in their 30s, 40s, 50s. And I tend to like that, my reaction to some of the stuff that goes in the regular the media.
We have to talk.
Yeah.
Tobias?
Hi, I'm Tobias Buckell. I'm a Caribbean-born science fiction and fantasy author of some 15 or so novels and 120 short stories in various magazines and anthologies and whatnot.
My name is Brenda Clough, and I've been writing science fiction and fantasy for a really, really long time. It's kind of sad. And I'm currently sitting on a series of neo-Victorian thrillers, which are going to come out in 2021, 11 volumes dominating the the publishing world like a colossus. But because of their series, the heroine ages out to a certain, so there's a whole lifespan thing, female development thing, menopause, childbirth, all the things that and actually that is a good way to begin. I think that women are particularly more subject to the constraints of time than men, and that's nowhere more visible than in Hollywood. Wendelin, you were going to talk about that.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about it on a couple of different levels because I've done some reading on it as I've gotten older, because I think that we are not really taught in our culture to understand and to be able to cope with aging as we age. We're kind of just left off on our own, especially as women. I know in the past that age was already an issue for both men and women, and mostly women. The burden was on, and the boomer generation, from what I've read, really has wanted to reevaluate that and sort of redefine aging as they've gotten older. So things have started to change for both men and women anyway, but the women it's still not really caught up to. And I've been surprised since I've started self-publishing. I've been looking in different avenues to try to get my books out there. I've actually come across places where they don't even want you to submit any female protagonists at all. And bro culture online, it's like if it's got a female protagonist, then it must be bad automatically. So you've got that angle along with the aging, and that's something, since I spend a lot of time with East Asian media, they have a lot in Japan. Everything is high school. You have 13-year-old prodigies, every single story. And it's like, so I make everybody 400 years old in mine, or 50.
Good. And you can see that particularly in Hollywood, like actresses age right out, it's really hard if you're an actress over, let us say 30,
from what I've read,
to get roles.
Not even for younger ones, they don't have fully blown storylines anymore. They used to have them more, I guess, in the 50s, maybe 40s. But now they've gotten even away from character development of women even younger. So the older women.
And you can see that with men, look at the way Harrison Ford is always able to be cast, I don't even know how old he is, older than dirt.
70 or 80 now, or thereabouts at least.
Yeah, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with, hot older guys. I have no problems with this, but there's not exactly what we would call parity on this. Scott?
Well, I also agree with everything you've been saying, and actually you've just kind of led into an illustration I wanted to show. This is from our magazine. This is one of our heroines, getting a little light on there, but you can see obviously an older woman who in her youth was a Russian sniper, and she ended up immigrating to America and living in Pittsburgh. And there's a vampire that's terrorizing Pittsburgh community. And because of her background and because of her cultural heritage and because of her skills, she ends up being the only one who even sees this threat and is willing to try to take it out. And, you know, the theme of it is just, I'm not as young as I was. You know, she has some aches and pains when she, you know, jumps over walls and kills vampires. But, you know, that story, I really loved it when I read it. And it's written by a Pittsburgh author, Gene Martin. And so we're conscious of that when we're putting our magazine together. I think probably because I'm 63 and my wife's like 4 years younger than me, and we're getting into that age as well. But we want to see stories that reflect, you know, our age group and that sort of thing. Just real quick, like when you talk about just how aging culturally, when we go to conventions and stuff, we often get this vibe. People feel, oh, well, you're retired now and you've decided to do a magazine. And it's like, hell no, we work like 60 hours a week and then we do a magazine. It's like, we're just as energetic and just trying to do artful things and do things with our business as we were when we were in our 20s. And, you know, you do get that idea of, oh, well, you're older, you should kind of be stepping back.
Dial it back.
No, you're just getting
We're not
started
dialing
now.
back yet.
Yeah, now's when you have all the basis where you can really do something. 20, you barely have anything under your belt to really work with.
And there's a whole slew of things that, you know, it's boring. I don't think I could handle another book about another Bildungsroman, you know, about a 13-year-old looking for love and power and etc. It's
Was
like,
I doing that at 13?
please, not again, please. Tobias, do you want to throw in?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's, you know, boomers discover fire, boomers discover, age discrimination suddenly. After being the original culture that sort of steered, you know, the U.S. towards, you know, glorifying youth because they were the largest,
Youth cohort.
Yeah, the largest youth cohort, you know, post-war cohort. So yeah, it's kind of fascinating how much that influences our culture still, which is that, like, you know, that demographics money in terms of just entertainment is now kind of having an impact where they're looking around and going like, hey, wait a second. It's really interesting in that, like, I'm in my early 40s and I'm just now starting to see culture like grab stuff from my childhood and really get excited about it, because my own demographic now is starting to hit a sort of like very time of impact where it's got a lot of money to spend. So suddenly it's being paid attention to. And that's been kind of, interesting to watch. The problem, as you say, is all of that. You know, there is sort of, an interest in youth in our culture. In many Western cultures, it's sort of like, you know, the wisdom of the elderly is less prized. There's a super focus on, youth attractiveness, vim and vigor and excitement. Although, I mean, some of that does come from just, that's where all the energy is in the world, whether it's directed well or not. It's, and
there's the money issue. For a long time, the mantra was that you need to appeal to the youth market. That's how you sell movies. That's how you sell books. You need to get all the young people buying in. 60-year-olds, you figure they're going to buy them anyway.
Because in the US, though, there is like a very unique situation that came out of the 50s and 60s, which was the concept of the teenager, right? Most societies didn't have much of a concept of this sort of like in between adult and child stage. And the teenager in the US has this incredible buying power starting in the 1950s, where they start being given all this money to go out and spend. And so they become, a demographic that has to be catered to for things to make money, both clothing and entertainment and all music and all these other things, because their parents give them money to go, to get to the parent money. You got to pull it through the teenager. So you have to appeal to the teenager in so many different aspects.
That tells you right there what some of the problem with the thinking is, though, because obviously 60-year-olds have a lot of disposable income to a certain level because they don't have the young children to care for anymore. And the parents have more money. If it's the kids that have to go and ask all of them for the money, then shouldn't we be looking at these older demographics? Now, they don't have as much free time to sit around and consume like the teenagers or the younger kids. But still, I mean, you would think that somebody would put two and two together and go, wait a minute, you know, these people have money and they have interests too, and shouldn't we make sure that they have their interests addressed? And you know,
absolutely. I mean, this isn't me defending
No.
it. This is just me noticing how it developed that way. You know,
Right.
Someone also made another really good point. So there are two other points. One is which that, of course, just through demographics, that there are more young people because, you know, death and taxes,
Old people
right?
die.
Right. And so you have, like, you know, if you look at the cohorts, you know, you'll see that it's a lot more, you know, there's just a lot more younger people. So you've got a much wider base. And someone just made a really good comment in our comment section, which is that they said, you know, older generations have usually locked in their purchasing habits. So it's harder to get them to switch brands or to market to. Marketers tend to focus on, you know, people that they think they can sway. So as a result of these historical, cultural things, I think, the development of the teenager, the development of marketing, the development of these different things, the idea of, you know, kids being given all this money to have this sort of like adult childhood, these impacts kind of distorted and had an impact on our society in just a way that really prizes youth. However, we are talking a lot about youth and not about just awesome, you know, middle-aged protagonists and stories.
Well, a couple of my favorites would be Battlestar Galactica, Bill Adama and Laura Roslin. That relationship in that show, that really had a lot of emotional impact. And I think it showed that idea of older, wiser minds, both coming together in a relationship and also, you know, trying to save their community and save the universe. So that's a couple of my favorites.
There's a lot of older protagonists in the genre that are even if they're not like actually acting old, they're definitely not spring chickens, dating back to what is it in Ringworld, Louis Wu, he gets pretty old. There's a lot of you know, I think within the genre you could say that they've always been dealing the cards out to older persons. It is the huge influence of movies and TV that sort of distorts it, and that's driven, I know, by how things look, that people would always rather look at hot 13-year-olds not wearing a lot of clothing than older persons not wearing a lot of clothing.
I don't know. I think some people would beg to differ with Halle Berry and some of the other actresses that are now Gen X actresses that, you know, now I think that a Title IX connection is here. Is it Title IX that did the women's sports?
Yes.
That once women were allowed to maintain their bodies the same way men were, that we didn't like turn really, really like obviously aged very quickly. So you've got these women who have just really maintained that and maintained a good diet, and they look great and they don't look old. So, you know,
the huge advent of, you know, work that you can do, Botox, there's a huge plastic surgery thing that has become much more subtle and convincing in our lifetime. So there's like things you can do to hang on to it, but there's also the acceptance of, yes, you're older, we're going with the gray, you know, and that's I think that's something that's a little bit you know, you're not obliged to dye your hair anymore. You're not obliged to get hair plugs and deal with the you know, all of the ongoing things of age. It's Terry Pratchett, right, who has written a whole series about the Crohn's of Discworld. It's that kind of a thing where it's actually not something you have to hide now. We're going to go with this.
In speculative fiction, there's some of that idea of, yeah, we're old, but we're going to get like new bodies and have new adventures. Like I have my copy of John Scalzi's Old Man's War. You know, the idea of basically there's going to be technology and medical advancements and that, and we may be getting older, but we can go into a new youth, and it's that fountain of youth idea. I personally, you know, like it a little bit the other way, and that yeah, what we're going to get old and we're going to get decrepit and we're going to get gray, and you know, we still are going to have agency in the world and competency and you know, that sort of thing. So I like stories that tend to be you know, in that direction.
Well, I would say though, for that, you would have the older age range for that, more so like 60, 70 plus. I think we've, as women, we still are fighting for the 30, 40, 50 range. And I know like my character that I have in my series that I've got, that is one of the characters that's the main focus. She starts off in her early 40s and she takes on her niece that she has to escape the country with and raise her through her 50s, and you know how this whole change affects her and everything, and she's still working, and you know this kind of thing. You don't have to still be like out there trying to do martial arts, and you don't have to be looking for a new body at age 50, you know. So
and you know, you can see that now in our current time and space. Even if you could get a new body, even if clonal technology allows you to essentially have a new body, is that going to be available to us? Is that only going to be available to, you know, the movers and shakers in this country? It's not going to be available for us. So you can tell the story about the guy who is going to be able to do that, but then there's a whole range of other people who are never going to get that technology, and you know, we can watch them up there doing that, and you know, getting interesting COVID drugs or not. You know, there's I even if the technology is everybody, I just can't see that coming. You know, there are private swimming pools. There's not private swimming pools for everybody.
Yeah. You know, the other thing that, well, I mean, I think what we're doing is we're trying to, you know, trying to grow what you can show, right? And explore, you know, voices that have been maybe pushed back a bit. So in terms of literature, I think for me, I didn't really pay attention to how youth obsessed it all was, because I just assumed that, like, you know, I looked at my favorite authors and my favorite stuff, and then maybe other people had some different tastes. I didn't realize there was such a paucity of stuff out there until I wrote a novella called The Executionist, which is about a mom, medieval, you know, sort of a fantasy setting where this woman, you know, is taking care of her extended family, and her father is the executioner, and he gets sick and is dying. And that's the only form of income they have. So she dons the robe and secretly goes out there to continue on the work, and botches her first execution. And that just kind of launched the story. And I just wrote it without any kind of like thinking about this. And so many people had such a positive reaction to seeing a middle-aged character. I got so many really nice notes about it that I kind of was like, wait a second. That's interesting. I hadn't realized that there would be such, not that I like did a great thing, but I didn't realize that there'd be so many people not finding their own fiction, right? Because obviously as a young male, I was plenty catered to. So I was just like, surely everyone else has that experience, you know, because you're an idiot. And that was a really interesting moment for me, where I just, you know, kind of went back and looked at my characters, you know, that I was writing, and going like, okay, I'm really, you know, a proponent of like making sure that there are diverse voices, and I work really hard to bring diversity into my fiction. And, you know, I think of myself as kind of like, you know, trying to look for that stuff, but like, how do my old versus young characters shake out? Like, if I sit here and put them all into an Excel spreadsheet, do I have like a demographic range that matches reality, or do I kind of like have this whoop?
That is I would never have imagined doing a spreadsheet.
Yeah,
I'm known for doing spreadsheets. I always do that to check myself.
No, I can't. You know, like, unimaginable.
I think for me, some of it is just, you know, the fact that this is the age range that I've been going through, and then you don't really see that catered to. But I know, like, going back to like you were saying, whenever you were growing up, I was in a family where they made very, very pointed differences between the genders and expectations. And so, you know, me going to study was like a big controversy, even in my family. So I was very, very desperate for good female role models in all of these places. And I found, you know, because we read a lot of stuff that was very dominant male, and it was kind of hard. And I really like looked for that and latched on to anything that had those kind of characters. And a lot of times they were older, the ones that I liked. It wasn't ones that were my age necessarily. So I've always liked to write older characters, but you kind of do have to go to the younger ones, I think, because of the fact that they're blank slates. They have the time. They haven't been locked into a life yet. So sometimes that kind of development makes it more necessary to go back. But if you have a good layer of very solid, prominent older characters, then you can sort of offset that. You know, they're not just there to prop up the young kids, and they're not just in the background, but they have their own interesting histories, and you can shift the narrative off to them or something. Then that actually can sort of fill in that gap.
I suspect that, oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to let everybody know we do have some questions coming in the Q&A, so we want to make sure we put a little time into that. Maybe,
Yeah, somebody can let me know. Of course I don't have a clock. Oh wait, I do have a clock. Somebody can let me know, but maybe in about 10 minutes we'll switch over and at least try to address some of the questions.
Yeah, it's still pretty early in the
yeah.
I think some of the reasons why we default to young is lazy storytelling, right? Because if you look at just sort of like, it's easier, right? There's a reason that there's so many young orphans, right? Like first you got to get rid of the parents, because parents would object to someone setting out on a great big huge quest and doing all these crazy things that risk their lives. So first you kill off the parents real quick and set that up with a sentence. Two, having them be young means that they're experiencing things for the first time. So if you're doing any kind of fantasy or science fiction, it lets you explain, right? If they're going to magic school, you can just info dump, because other classmates have to get you up to speed. You see this all the time. And if you're going in on a space expedition, right, you're younger, like everyone's going to be telling you why things are happening the way they're happening. So I think that part of it is just like lazy storytelling. You're just sort of like, oh.
And there's also that whole plot coupon thing where a younger character has to accumulate the plot coupons. They need to find true love. They need to find the magic sword. They need to find the horse with the wings on it. So you've got this whole list, this whole menu of things that you can grind the story around on, but only if they're young. If you're 50, if you have not found if you haven't worked out your love life by now, you have other problems, and it's a different book.
Well, there's a whole demographic of that, though. And back to your point, though, Tobias, you have to remember about the orphan thing. There are tons of kids who are aging out of foster care. We kind of ignore that possibility as something. I mean, that is a reality. I just read something this week on it, about the difficulties they've been having in COVID. So it's not necessary to get rid of the parents per se whenever you've got these situations, but some of that also comes down to maybe not reading widely in terms of just the general situation in society, or maybe not ever encountering those kind of people in your life. That maybe that's why sometimes it doesn't occur to you that, oh, there are kids who don't have parents and haven't had parents for 10 years and they're just, flip through the foster system, and then nobody ever, they drift off into the world.
So that's sort of a marketing thing then, because there are male readers who don't ever read about female protagonists. There are male readers who don't read female authors, and so that's by no means unknown. And then you could easily then, it's certainly there must be a large tranche of readers who don't ever read about older protagonists, because how exciting could that possibly be? And to broaden their minds is a little more difficult, because if you're locked into that, I only ever read about male characters who carry large weapons. Well, that's sort of a niche that you're in.
I want to talk just briefly, because I hear the things that you guys are saying, and I want to talk about a story we published that kind of breaks all those rules.
Nice.
And it was in issue 4. It's called Hot Times at Shady Pines by an author, Gary Closser. What rules does it break? Well, one, the protagonists are like in their hundreds. This is a point in history where a drug has been, or a process has been invented that basically youthens people and keeps them at a certain state of youth, but it doesn't work in everyone. And these guys are afflicted in a way where, like, some of their organs might be youthful, some might not be. One of the characters actually has like a split down the line where one side of their body is aged and the other side is youthful. But they're basically at like a rest home where they're being taken care of because of this affliction and kind of forgotten about the world. But this story has a love interest. So basically you have two characters who are falling in love. There's actually like a sex scene between aged characters. They basically run into a problem where a gang is attacking, trying to hold these people hostage for money kind of thing. And the aged characters have to use their experience, their technical knowledge, their cultural backgrounds, all that kind of stuff to solve this on their own without waiting for the people who run the rest home to actually do anything about it. So it kind of like breaks kind of all those rules and really gets us into older characters and what their lives are like and the family relationships and difficult decisions. So I think it can be done by imaginative authors just to kind of take all those rules and jumble them up and say, I'm going to do this really cool, interesting thing over here.
Well, let me
I think one of the reasons it was invisible to me is that I read a lot of mystery books as well. And so that's less like Agatha Christie, the retired detective, the sort of cozy mysteries, the burnt out weary PI who's just about to retire. All of that stuff is like there. And so like I since everything blends in my head, it took me a long time to kind of look at science fiction and fantasy and kind of go like, oh yeah, there is kind of like a bent towards younger characters.
Let me ask everybody what they think about marketing this kind of material. What sorts of ideas or experiences have you had about that, or have you tried?
It's hard to imagine putting a very old character on the cover of a book. That's where the marketing, finally, the rubber hits the road, because the cover is the first avenue you have into the reader. They look at, what do they look at when they click on the thing in Amazon? Well, it's the cover. And it's really hard to imagine I just have difficulty imagining that visually. And I would be interested to hear about covers where you could actually identify as an older person. I'm thinking about books that are clearly about persons who are not young, and somehow the covers do not have the picture of that person, that hero
Scott,
on it.
Hold up, Old Man's War.
How old is he?
Yeah, but it's really focusing on war,
Exactly.
The original cover has an old man on it. And when it started to take off and sell really well for, like the Tor came out and like put the spaceship on it because, an old person on the cover is like, I'm sure booksellers were telling them like, it's going to be hard to push this. So yeah, it's got two different colors, two different covers very shortly if you ever take a look at the original.
And I'm actually not a good example or person to talk to about marketing science fiction and fantasy, because although we're doing the magazine, we basically started down this project basically saying we're going to do what we want to do. And so we're not focused on basically making a lot of money out of this or making sure it's financially successful. So we have that luxury to say we want to make statements that we believe in, and we want to promote stories that we believe in, and not try to look at that. So there is that in our day job world. It's completely the opposite, where we are actually trying to work with commercial ventures. So it's like we're just diametrically doing something different than we do in our day job. But if you're trying to publish and make money publishing, you do have to pay attention to social forces. Which actually, one thing we didn't talk about real quick is like social media, and how now with the internet, social media and everything, that you have the ability to develop these niche audiences that you might not otherwise have been able to reach. And you really can very targetedly focus people who are interested in exactly what you're doing or exactly what you're talking about, and kind of develop that very niche audience. So that's a whole new thing all by itself.
And since we care about that, that makes it a lot easier for us to not make the kind of missteps that I see some of the traditional publishers doing with, making cover art that doesn't match and people get offended and all kind of other stuff that there've been a whole lot of tempest in a teapot over the past couple of years.
Oh,
well,
go ahead.
A moment of silence for our dear departed moderator.
That's where I was going.
He'll be back.
We've got enough questions to keep us going. Do we just want to address those 5 questions? And
go ahead. I looked them over. I don't really know how to answer some of them, but go ahead and read them out, and we'll see what we can come up with.
Well, so the first question is, what are your favorite books or other media with middle-aged protagonists? And if you want to mention your least favorite or the worst, what would that be?
Protagonist or just a major character in it, because when I was growing up, I really liked the Dragonlance Chronicles saga, and of course, Paladin is an old man most of the time. Whenever he's going through there, he's bumbling around and joking around with one of the characters, and I always thought that that was such a warm and interesting kind of character. He's actually very powerful because it turns out he's a god, but I always liked the fact that they had that in there, and they kind of didn't. They didn't play him as like overly strong or anything, and they just thought he was annoying.
Well, and we already talked about it, but Ringworld and Lu Wu, that's one of my favorite books, Old Man's War, and, you know, talked about, as far as characters, Battlestar Galactica and Laura Roslin and Bill Adama, really good. There are lots of good movies that, you know, like Cocoon, Gran Torino, not science fiction, but just you got, you know, Clint Eastwood, who's really active out there, you know, in his 80s or close to 90s now, I guess. And if anybody saw the movie The Robot and Frank with Frank Langella.
It's a beautiful movie.
Yep, yep. So those are some of my favorites.
All right, then we've got 3 other questions. Mary Beth Griffin was wondering, I wondered if the focus on younger characters is because they're more of a tabula rasa. Yeah. And publishers think they can mold them the way they want, even though it's the writer who should decide.
I don't know that it's a publisher issue, but it's certainly they're easier to write about because they haven't done anything yet. They're not locked into their lives and have responsibilities.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
I think also if you're looking, well, I mean, it'd be hard to know ahead of time, but like short fiction has a lot more freedom, and I think writers there experiment a whole lot more in terms of like age of character and what they want to do, because you don't have to worry about a book cover, right? It doesn't, you know, that the marketing department doesn't get involved.
Well, I don't know. The book cover, I think that there are ways to finagle that. And like I said, you know, Halle Berry doesn't look like a hag. She's like what? She's probably older than me. So it's not like you automatically have that crone image or some old man.
No.
So, yeah. I mean, there are ways that they could deal with it if they wanted to deal with it better.
Well, and you also have the idea of longevity. If you're starting with younger characters, you can build them through arc of movies or something like that. And if you're starting with older characters, you don't necessarily have that luxury of saying we're going to be working with this character and this actor, you know, 10 or 15 years from now. Although that's probably going to change with deep fake stuff. I'm personally waiting for the next John Wayne movie to come out. I think it'll be great. So they can do so much with technology.
COVID changes the whole calculus with that too.
I think we also have this, you know, thing where like a lot of Western, you know, cinema in particular is rooted around physical conflict, right? So that kind of, again, you know, pushes you towards people who can do more interest, like the stunts without risking their bodies. And so that like makes them more interested in using younger folk. Although like, I really loved Red, if you ever saw that movie series, which took all, you know, older actors and put them into a spy thriller action adventure, which is fantastic.
It's interesting, you know, you're talking about the film industry, because I worked for a Pan-Asian film festival for like a dozen years, and I was on programming. So I didn't normally watch a lot of genre stuff. I watched the literary stuff, which tends to focus more on older characters.
Yeah.
So you can get the pacing and sort of meld that together with something more genre and a little bit more action oriented, or at least, you know, make the situation around them as threatening and challenging as possible without making it a physical threat. There's other ways to do that, and that's what I tried to do with my one series with my character who's, you know, in her 40s with her niece.
I think often,
situation. Yeah.
I think often we default to physical violence as conflict because we're looking for conflict. Another question is, not sure if you're using this to queue up questions for later. Oh, we are. I'd like to hear you talk about the different types of conflicts, plot challenges that are specific to older characters that don't get told when the focus is on young protagonists.
I have a good one. In the story I was just talking about, Hot Times at Shady Pines, one of the conflicts is the fact that we have a relationship developing between 2 older characters. On the female character side, her husband is basically like bedridden and, you know, somewhat comatose kind of thing, where he's being taken care of, but she, you know, is very much in love with him and watches him, but he can't be there physically for her. He can't be there emotionally for. So there's that conflict between, okay, she's falling for this other guy as well, and how do you deal with that relationship internally? Is that a betrayal? What do you think about how affairs work when you're 100 years old? That kind of thing. So I thought that was an interesting complication and an interesting thing to put in the story as part of the subplots.
Someone also had the one of my favorites, S. Bosco, said there's also that trope of the ancient master who's also a badass, which I love. Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about some of our favorites. So I think someone was asking, like, what are some writing tips, some craft tips towards, like, doing more of this? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I would just talk to people. I mean, I used to work as a temp in the Alzheimer's Research Center for a while. I knew people who had family members who were taking care of their very beloved spouse who had Alzheimer's and were really, really devoted, things like that. Like for what you're talking about, Scott, that kind of character. Talk to people. And as you get older, look at the things that interest you. I mean, this is something that everyone's going to have to face. It's not something special to one demographic or other. It's temporary. Everybody's going to have to go through a certain amount of it. So, start with some of that and see what sort of ideas it gives you.
Yeah, and when we're looking at things coming in for the magazine, we're just always looking for things that are, engage our imagination, take us in different directions. It's like, I guess it's not specifically to older people, but it's just that idea that take us somewhere where we haven't been already. So if you're looking out there and you're reading stuff, it's a very natural thing to say, oh, I love that movie, I love that book, I want to do that. But always keep in mind that, well, that's already been done. So we don't want to, make a million different types of Star Wars movies. That didn't quite work, right? So do the same thing when you're looking at older characters. Look for things that you haven't seen, or ways of approaching it that you haven't seen, or problems that you haven't seen, that kind of thing.
I think a really good thing I always encourage people to do is just go read autobiographies, right? Biographies and autobiographies give you kind of a sense of, like, and you find interesting things there. So it's like, go read. If you feel like you are not able to do that, with your characters, go start reading autobiographies of, older people who are doing very interesting things, and that'll immediately kind of fill in, your creative, loam with lots of stuff. We have 2 new questions, or actually one is just. Someone wanted to share that the older character who goes back in time to wise up their younger self is one of their favorite
Interesting. I
tropes.
think we have some that they put in the chat too. I saw some.
Yeah, I saw. We've got people really started talking really fast.
I see Jane. I think that might be related to you, Scott, that she's talking about.
Oh, yes, it is.
Yeah, I think that's what some of the complaint has been, that back in the 40s, like whenever, like Cary Grant and all of them were doing films, that it was a lot more, they were more interested in older characters. They're more interested in more developed female characters. But then over the decades, it's kind of become this club where like the same kind of person is culturally and maybe demographically in these positions, and everything has kind of gotten very narrow.
The other question that has popped up is, should older protagonists be surrounded by younger characters as mirrors?
As mirrors? Why do you need them as mirrors? They just would be there.
I think you see that, a lot, even just going back to Battlestar Galactica that I mentioned before, is you have to have the action heroes as well as the older people. But I don't necessarily think that has to be the case.
Brenda!
Hey, welcome back, moderator.
Yeah.
I think there's plenty of room for, older characters to simply be on their own and have their own adventure.
Okay, I see a question on here from Brandon Ketchum that I want to address definitely. Should the mental age necessarily match the physical age? Well, being in corporate for a lot of years, I've noticed something that happened at particularly one job where the 20-year-old set was all super, super serious. They never laughed at anything, never had any fun, seemed like, in the workforce. you got like the 30 range was sort of in between.
I can't
The higher up you got 40s, 50s, the more silly they got, the more they wanted to joke around. And so I don't know, I joke about how the older I get, the more I go into age regression. I think that you kind of do, maybe you get tired of having all the responsibility and just want to have fun now, or, you know, let go a little bit. And so I don't know what people think you should be like. And this goes back to what we said at the beginning of this, where society doesn't really tell us what we're supposed to be like, or they've got very ugly stereotypes of what aging should be for people. I mean, do we have to be like depressed and do nothing and think nothing because we're older? So what does it mean to
or have no sex?
Well, that's also part of it. But I mean, in general, I mean, I know I'm doing cosplay, and I'm doing more cosplay as I get older than I did whenever I was in my 20s. So, I mean, I don't think that my mental age matches my physical age at all. I think I'm going the opposite. So, but I think that we need to examine what our expectations are, and if that really is what, you know, the reality is for a lot of people.
I agree. Older characters are not, I mean, just older people in general in our society. There isn't that idea. You know, I'll just point to myself. My wife and I play Pathfinder and you know, role-playing games. I'm actually sitting here in my modeling area here in my basement. I'm working on an Eldar grav tank model. You know, it's like I do lots of things that like 9-year-olds would love to do.
Yeah, 50 going on 14, baby. You know it.
Yep.
Awesome.
I can't see any of the commentary here, so someone else ask a question from
go to the
on
chat
the website.
because we finished up the Q&A. Let me see who else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've answered all the questions. There are no more questions.
Oh my God, you guys are so efficient.
We've solved it all. We've solved it all. We're such great
well,
panelists.
we still have some time here.
Yeah.
Well,
you go on. So you tell us what you think about all this stuff. You can answer all the questions that are in the Q&A and chat then.
well, I can't see them. Somehow mysterious things happen here that I don't completely grasp, and I blame it on the weird internet here, because strange things happen here that have nothing to do with me, and they have to do with weird
Technology is terrible.
It is terrible. I should say the reason I'm signed up for this panel is because I'm writing a series about a Victorian lady named Miss Marian Halcombe, and because she had originally been invented by Wilkie Collins for his own novel, The Woman in White, and then I stole her. But then I couldn't go back in time, had to go forward. So I started with her at about the age of 30, and she ages essentially over 11 volumes to about 65, 68, something like that. And who knows? But I tried to deal with all of the issues of the age of the character when she's at. And so I think that in a sense, you don't confine yourself to the question of old age. There's the question of, you know, if you're 35 years old and you have 3 kids and they are driving you whack, it's a different issue than when you're 65. And why is Medicare such a pain in the ass in this country? There's different issues that you're dealing with, and there's not a problem with you know, everybody's got their problems, right? So I've tried to sort of like delve into all of them.
Well, at 65 too, you find a lot of people who their friends and their relatives are all dying off, and they don't have the same social group that they had, or, you know,
there's that whole thing about how your life may narrow down as you age out, simply because people up and die on you.
Mm-hmm.
And they, I mean, I know that, you know, young people die too, but it's much more rare as you get older. Darn it, people keep on dying, and it's really in bad taste. And I think none of you should ever do that. Okay, don't die.
We'll try not to.
Real quick, there's a good comment in the chats from Beth.
Okay.
She says, I think maybe we're always playful, but teens to 30s think they have to hide that to be taken seriously. And I would agree with that. I can relate that to myself at that age. And now that I'm, you know, starting to get into my mid 60s, it's like, I don't give a crap. It's like, you know, I'll play.
You got no more fucks left to give.
Right.
And with women, there's that allied issue of your sexuality. You know, when you're 20 or 30, then you're always having to deal with, is he hitting on me? Are we going to have sex? You know, there's that whole thing. After you age past that point, it's not an issue so much anymore. They don't bother you. you're able to actually be your own person.
Really?
In theory.
Oh, okay.
It's an advantage, for instance, to not have to wear makeup, to not worry about your appearance, because nobody cares whether your cleavage looks good or not anymore.
Well,
you have control over that.
That all depends now, because I only started wearing makeup when I started turning 35 and started getting into stage work. And now I wear more makeup again than I did when I was younger. So it's totally the opposite, just it worked out that way. But yeah, I guess everybody's on a different trajectory. It depends on what circles you're in.
And also it depends, I think, on where you started out. The complaint of, very pretty women is that they only see your boobs, let us say, rather than any of the real you're essentially a pair of boobs entering the room with a human being attached. Really annoying. And after a certain point, you can get past that, but you essentially have to age past that. And then suddenly you can be a real person again, because that whole I am Marilyn Monroe thing is no longer around your neck. I don't know if guys have this problem. Maybe Brad Pitt has this problem.
Maybe Brad Pitt.
I think he's doing okay for himself.
I don't remember.
We've got 2 minutes to fill.
Okay. Does anyone have there's a good one. Does anyone have a final concluding word on this? Oh, I know a good one. Should we encourage our readers to go and buy books with older characters? I presume if you're in this panel, you're already aware of this issue. What about the people who aren't on this aren't attending this panel?
Well, I think just demographically, the nation's getting older. So, Tobias was kind of talking about this earlier. It's just, there's going to be more interest in older characters because the nation is starting to get older. And here in Pennsylvania, where I am, that's more serious and obvious than lots of other places. So you're going to see that.
And I think, like I said earlier, the boomer generation has forced the issue to be re-examined. And I think that's only a good thing. Even though it's
the last thing we can do for the nation, because we've done that whole thing, the teen thing, the sex thing, the radical thing, and now
the age. Yeah. Well.
All right. Anyone else? I don't know whether I don't know. I don't have a clock. How much more time do we have?
We're done.
Seconds.
We're done.
Yeah, our sanctuary moon person will kick us out here shortly.
Okay. Okay. Obi-Wan, you can cut us off if you want to.
I don't. Oh, look, I'm a co-host.
I
still see the recording, so I'm just sort of like, we got to vamp for a little bit until they kick us out. Oh, there we go.
Oh, wait, there we go.
We're done.
We're on.
Oh! Thank you. Oh!
Yay, we did great. Thank you so much, guys.
Great panel. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to cut this.
Have a good rest of the con.